Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 7th RANT Radio of 2021. I'm your host, Thomas Odoms, and I have brought together a really fun little set of talent onto the show this evening to talk about the was, is, and will be of cybercrime in a post-pandemic age. It's a good, chewy topic, and hopefully you'll be able to enjoy it as much as we will talking about it. Huge thank you to Trend Micro for their sponsorship of this session. A fab selection of articles on the topics we plan to cover are all accessible on the event page and will be sent along with via email tomorrow morning. So please do go and have a read of them. Likewise, for those of you lucky enough to get one of the free beer care packages, congratulations. They were brought to you by our dear partner, Accumulation Consulting. Hopefully you've got them chilled ahead of the show as well. But please do go and enjoy them. Finally, please remember this is an interactive session. For those of you who haven't attended a rant before, we were born off the back of a pub in which everyone would be able to heckle, hands raised and pint in hand, and it was all very fun. And then we've had to go digital, and that's okay because we've worked out ways to work around it. So please do send in your questions via the Q&A tab, and I will make sure that I vocalize them. It will be fun, a lot more fun if you do that. So please do throw stuff in throughout. We'll give the panelists a little bit of time to talk about what they think about the topic, and then we'll move on to the questions pretty soon afterwards. So please do throw them in. Likewise, if there's anything else that you'd like to ask the panel that you miss out on during the actual show itself, please do reply to the email that goes out tomorrow, and we'll make sure to pass them on if they weren't covered. So I think that's pretty much it from me, which is always a good sign. Let's go to our wonderful panel for introductions. So first off, Donna, would you be able to give me a little bit of introduction about who you are, where you've been?
Hello, so I'm Donna Goddard, and I currently run the data loss prevention programme at the London Stock Exchange as part of the Heritage Refinitiv part there. So I've been here for about 7 years, and I set up the data loss prevention programme there. Prior to that, I was 13 years at Morgan Stanley doing a number of different things in cyber, from data loss prevention, identity, I did a little bit of education. It's very much in the early days, on-site reviews. Really looking forward to chatting tonight.
Lovely, thanks so much, Donna. And Catherine, if you wouldn't mind.
Hello, thanks for the intro there. I'm a senior manager at Virgin Money. I look after cybersecurity and the operational aspects. I've been working in security for roughly 9 years, I think now. Yep, 9 years. And I've got a full background in financial services across IT support around that as well. Bit like Donna, I think, in terms of background, lots of different varieties of responsibilities and experiences across the year, or years rather. And there's most things which I voluntary or involuntary been involved in. So I'm looking forward to drawing upon some of those experiences and bouncing off stories, etc., and responding to questions. So looking forward to it. Thank you.
Lovely, thanks so much, Catherine. And last but not least, Myla, if you wouldn't mind.
Hi, good day, I should say, because it's morning back here. I'm Myla, I'm with Trend Micro. I'm one of the director for research in Trend Micro, based out in our latest research center in Canada. And I've been working essentially in the security industry for over a decade now. It's been quite a ride, especially seeing where it is compared to where it was 10 years ago. Is a massive difference. As a background, I don't have any IT engineering computer course. I think it's the love for this thing, but when I see my career, I think it's purely have been in ICT for before Trend, also in the technology side of the business. So a good ride, I must say.
Lovely, thanks for that, Myla. So that's our panel of experts, and we're going to be talking about this nice fun topic for the next hour. As I say, chuck in your questions when you want them, but we're going to talk around the topic now, and then I'm going to hand over to Myla to get us started. So, as a quick reminder for those just joining, this is the topic we are going to be talking about. Mutated cyber, the was, is, and will be of cybercrime in a post-pandemic age. COVID-19 is being used in a variety of malicious campaigns, including email spam, BEC attack, ransomware, and other scams. Recent findings include how scammers took advantage of the surge in online activity during the pandemic, targeting businesses and buyers that were settling into new ways of transacting. We also look into how these attacks will affect our current and future digital economy and practices, such as impact of the security of online transactions, information across industries, accumulation of data collected, processed and stored through this crisis and its effect on data privacy and security, and finally, appetite of the threat actors. How are they changing their game plans? Now, having heard from our panel, obviously Mila is the person that gets kicked off with this. Mila's been doing some amazing stuff leading the team at Trend Micro with a lot of the research that I referenced at the beginning, which will be making sure it makes its way to your inbox. So I'm going to hand it over to Mila now so that she can shine the first light on this interesting issue. Over to you, Mila.
I don't know if I'm going to shine the light or I'm going to shine the darkness of it, but I will try. I think a lot of people would say, was the attack, the first wave of the COVID threat tactics are something new? Was there something complex? Ideally, when it started, I call it the first wave. This is highly predictable. And I think Catherine and Donna will agree with me that this is a typical modus operandi for something very popular. But let me point out that the first wave that we saw, there's probably about 900,000 unique threats. This is small, but still big, right? A lot of the first wave we've seen in March all the way to the second quarter of last year, or 2019, that is a lot of distribution of misinformation. The second wave, which I think is around September-ish to end of 2020, is what I call, this is now the malicious distribution of attack. They got better. They knew it's going to last a little bit longer. They dealt with a little bit more on simple attacks like phishing, scams, credential sniffing, to something more complex, like we've started working from home at that time. So there's a lot of attacks on VPN or any other tools that you and I are using. Now I think we are in the third wave. It's somewhere that started tail end of 2020 to where it is right now in 2021, where I call it from misinformation to malicious distribution to mega attacks. Because now we're seeing supply chain attacks. Similarly to now where everybody's worried about the cold management system, the distribution of vaccine and the logistics and preparation. So this is where the concentration of the attack is for something simple, now to a little bit more critical infrastructure. And I think we're seeing around 30% of threats that are going this way. So that's a bit concerning at the moment. The question is, what's the fourth wave? And I think this is where the conversation would lead us today. So Tom, I don't know if that answers a question, but it's a dark one, right?
Absolutely, and it's a good opening salvo. So thank you for that, Mila. Now I'm going to hand over to either Catherine or Donna. Over to you, Donna.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the things that's been a big impact from the COVID situation is, as you mentioned, more people working from home, which has allowed the bad actors to really increase their demographic as to who they might target. Whereas in the past, they might have maybe targeted big organisations and tried to get in through the perimeter there or their supply chain. They've now got so much more scope where they've got people working from home, not necessarily in a position where they can take advantage of their company's security posture. In addition to that as well, you've got, for example, the elderly, whereas before they tended to be a little bit more suspicious of things like online shopping or credit card transactions. They've been in a situation where they've actually had to adopt those practices without necessarily being comfortable with what they're doing. And even if you think about things like schools, for example, schools normally wouldn't be such a big target because most of the pupils are in school, whereas now you've got the remote work, you've got the ransomware, you talk about attacks on the national infrastructure, so things like the NHS, and then there's the proliferation of data as well. So it's not just the normal what's your password, what's your user ID. It's even down to paper copies of people's personal data where they've maybe checked into a restaurant and they've left their telephone number there and they've left their names of their parties, etc. So there's a far greater expanse of data that you need to protect and that could potentially be targeted by bad people. And I think that's probably given the bad actors a whole new avenue to attack. from what I've seen as well, whereas before the ransomware used to be very much targeted towards getting the payout back, now they're tending to try and take credentials more than just trying to encrypt the data. And in addition to that as well, you even saw quite recently where a group of people when the electric power stations were targeted in the US actually said they didn't intend to cause such a negative impact. So it's almost like they're trying to be moral about it as well. So I definitely think it's an interesting time, and there's going to be quite a bit of change because a lot of people aren't going to return to working in the office so much as they have in the past. So these gaps are going to be here for a while, and I think security postures and strategies are going to have to change to adopt to that.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and actually builds into a little bit of information that we've been seeing some of. A huge rise in gift card scams. So a lot of people, it's a tale as old as time itself, right? You get a message through, tends to be on WhatsApp or very quick. We need you to make a payment, or we really need you to get a bunch of gift cards. It tends to come from someone senior in the organization. Apparently there's a dearth of it going on with new COVID hires because they've never met the CEO or the person other than through email, so there's nothing to base them on. They haven't been able to pick up the behaviors that you normally would, the water cooler talk, all of that kind of thing. So is that something that any of you have seen? Or
it's not something that I've seen, but I think it's a pertinent point around that onboarding people during the pandemic, where you've not had that I suppose it's that cultural, that touch and feel experience that you would normally have when you're onboarded. It's normally quite an embracing time, whereas I guess now it's quite a cold period where you're issued your device and that's your first touch point with the company, which is quite wildly different. The onboarding process is normally much more touchy-feely, and you do get a feel for the culture. I think simply walking through the front door of your workplace gives you a lot of the perimeter feel and a bit of the business feel and a bit of how you behave and a bit of a corporate reminder about, without it necessarily being written down or right in front of you, that, do you know what, people around me are listening. It's not necessarily the sort of information you'd want to share in an open space, but when you're at home, it's been pretty hot lately. You've got your windows open. Who knows who's walking past and can maybe hear snippets of the things you're talking about. And I think the whole world of information, and I think the whole look and feel of how you conduct yourself at work is so different now. I was lucky enough to be onboarded into my role about 3 weeks before pandemic started. So I did have a little bit of that welcome to the business feel, but most of my team are up in Glasgow, and because of obviously COVID restrictions coming in, I've not had the chance to build that in-person rapport. So I think that does play quite an important part into how we work now, and it will do going forward, because I'm not seeing a huge rush of organizations saying, you know what, we will go back to whatever normal was before now. We've got a new normal and we've got new perimeters to consider within that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really interesting point there, especially looking at how it was. The old school onboarding processes are just, for a lot of organizations, you're never going to see that. The places that I've heard that are now back to work are all, the phased return, or they're just getting hot desk only offices. There's never going to be that camaraderie and closeness and constant full-time work, at least for a couple of years, I think. So I don't think you're ever going to be able to get those more informalized checks and balances that you've kind of learned to base a lot of the security posture on. Yeah, interesting. So is this something that you see over in Canada as well, Marla?
Well, the temperature here, just as much as the weather out there, is almost the same. I think I always say that the global pandemic is the great equalizer, where the rhythm and the techniques that we see, for instance, in Asia is extremely similar to what we see here in Europe or in the North American region. It's very much the same. I think let's try to somehow humanize a lot of these threat actors, or what I call criminals at some point. When you think about it, they act like yours or my organization, that for a longer period of time, they have POC, they have templated, they have worked on some of these attacks. And we're just seeing they just are taking opportunity right now, because the great pandemic has arrived. a good example is what Catherine and Donna are alluding to earlier, where when you look at the big attack on the colonial pipeline or critical infrastructure, that was actually the maturity level of what we called 5 years ago as business email compromise or business process compromise. Now they saw the light and say, wow, I have a way to do it because no eyes are in the critical infrastructure, right? So we're seeing a bit of that where they have invented it many years ago. They now see that opportunity. And speaking of business process, many years ago, we're seeing 1 or 2%. Now it's about 40%. Imagine. Yeah. And they're targeting critical infrastructure because they go for bigger target, bigger return, and sadly, bigger and wider victim. So to me, that's where it's going to come maybe a little bit on an extended fourth wave, perhaps.
Yes, yes, indeed.
I think the scary thing for me, I was going to say, I think the scary thing for me as well is that one of the areas that I can see people considering targeting are places like the NHS and the healthcare providers, and it might be potentially to disrupt the vaccine supply or anything like that. But unfortunately, these healthcare providers are the people that they don't have the extra funding to invest in their security programs because they're so busy trying to get extra resources to focus on the pandemic. So whereas obviously other like energy providers, etc., they've got challenges with things like technical debt, but at least they can focus resources on trying to resolve that. Healthcare providers really don't have that situation, and it does worry me a little bit that healthcare providers might be in a situation where they either have a data breach or they could have a serious impact to some of their delivery systems simply because they've got to focus on something else.
I think if you look back to the WannaCry in 2017 now, and that I think was a perfect example of healthcare not having enough investment, not having enough focus on actually what if this happens. So I think it's interesting because some of my network were working in the NHS IT at the time, and magically the money tree did appear. But it does make you wonder if between 2017 and 2020, 2021, if that money tree has died or if it's been replanted or whether it's been fed and watered across that period. And that will be interesting to see because, yes, we might have the focus on the technical element in the infrastructure, but when you talk about fridges of vaccines and things like that, and the logistical network, that's a whole different vector that maybe hasn't been considered in the same way. I'm not sure, but yeah, I think you're right to kind of call that out as a bit of a, well, how does that look and feel? There was some hacking groups, I think early doors, maybe April last year, where they were saying, do you know what, we're more ethical than the average group. We're not going to do anything particularly terrible with NHS. You know, we're good guys. And then I think within a matter of months, there was the Irish healthcare attack, which was, I guess, no surprise, but it's just interesting that there was a bit of PR being used by the hacking groups to say, do you know what, we're not bad guys. And then ta-da, actually, were you ever good guys? I don't know. It's a big question, but it's interesting just to see how that tide of morality changes.
Yes, absolutely. I think with this kind of thing, it does adapt quite quickly. So we've talked a little bit about the WAS and, you know, exactly what we saw at the start of the pandemic, which was people changing their stance when it came to scammers and things like that. You had businesses adapting. I don't know whether anyone did any business with stuff that they used to think was very secure, but I happened to be completing on a property during the start, and the idea that everything in my life was currently on someone's front, just their dining room table next to their housemates while they were working as they were rifling through, you know, 10 years worth of financial documents, it's a really interesting one. So there's a lot more sensitive information out in the wild. And I'd be interested to see whether that has ended up in more leakage and more data loss and things like that. So Donna, is that something that you've seen at all with obviously you can't say anything about London Stock Exchange Group, but at other organisations, do you think this could be an issue?
I think for me, one of the biggest concerns are areas where a lot of organisations have typically tried to rationalise their staffing. So they've maybe moved their help desks to areas that perhaps don't have quite as good infrastructure. And so if you look, for example, like call centres perhaps in India, where typically the controls there are relatively strong because people go into the office, they go through metal detectors, their phones go into lockers and things like that. Because the situation's been so serious out there, people have had to work from home. And they've got a lot more people having access to that data that you talk about that might potentially be on their laptops. You know, a lot more people sharing their internet connections. So I do wonder whether that could have led to some, you know, broader risks. So that's one thing I think I would be concerned about. And like I said earlier, you know, I do think there's been a proliferation of data from the point of view of where we've had to capture data where people have checked into places, whether it's in paper format or in the apps. They've pushed out these NHS apps, and I'm sure they've done the best they can with security, but like we know, you know, any of us know from the world, nothing is ever perfect. And there, particularly as we talked about earlier, with the NHS having to focus most of their resources on healing people. So again, you've got the extra data there, you've got the location data, you've got where, you know, people's telephone numbers, people's health situations. So for me, I do think this has opened the door to more risk. I think what we need to do is educate people about how to manage that risk, because I don't think we're going to be able to shut that door. And I'm a big believer in you can't change what happens in the past. You can only look to how we might do that for the future. So educating children in schools, how to protect themselves, educating elderly people, and just educating people who maybe aren't tech savvy on how to protect their data. And I think the responsibility of a lot of the companies that are managing that, probably that needs to be part of their portfolio.
Yeah, interesting, very interesting. So we've talked quite a bit there about the was. Let's start talking about the is now, shall we? So we've seen a big change in the way that business is done. We've got past a lot of those kind of legacy issues where I think people were running, the government and companies were running pretty up against it to try and get everyone back online and working, right? And over the previous, what, say 6 to 8 months, I think business has pretty much normalized. Everyone's got used to certain things. Have we seen any developments from those initial changes? Have we seen scammers and those looking to do wrong adapt beyond that now to continue cracking things? Is this something that you've noticed any changes in, Mila?
Well, it's similar to one of the Q&A we have today. I think a lot are now moving into vulnerabilities. Remember, again, when we go back to the previous very famous attack, it's really vulnerability. I think where they will definitely move is looking into this hybrid work environment. I don't think we will all go back to where it was, as we already said, right? So this is an area where they will heavily capitalize, right? In a hybrid environment, how we're going to see that working. The other one that I wanted to raise is that in the underground community, as we continue to also look into cyber criminal activities, there is a growing clamor and conversation on IoT. You know, we've all adapted to it. It has matured enough, but sadly, some of the security functions are not there. So I think that's another wave that we will probably look into. And then we've talked a little bit about, let's say, Catherine talked about WannaCry. WannaCry will never go away because a lot of the things that we would likely going to see is the recycling of previous exploits, previous windows that are still open in there, the bugs, and they will continue to manipulate it, right? So a lot of these actors doesn't have a lot of time in their hands. As I said, they will just continue to recycle and find a little bit of, you know, an open window. So to me, it's really, as we go back to remote work or hybrid model, we will see actions on the similar tools that regular IT people are using, but they will capitalize and obviously reinvent them towards more diversion, digital disruption.
Interesting. Donna, Catherine?
I'd agree with that. And I think some of the urgency that we've talked about in response to COVID, rolling out the app and all of these different things and support that's been sprung up to help people who have been furloughed, etc., or those looking to get the vaccine as soon as possible. There's a lot of fear and there's a lot of nervousness, and I think it's generated a lot of human vulnerability beyond like our normal level across society. I don't think it's special to one area or another. Perhaps it's more impactful to those, like you say, Donna, that aren't normally maybe as tech savvy, and that could be either end of the age bracket. So I don't think the methods of I actually changed that much. It's just there's a little bit more behind the urgency and the vulnerability and the usual stuff that you see coming through scam emails, texts, etc. It feels like those avenues of attack are more exposed because there is that I must respond to the government offering me support, financial support during this very difficult time, or I must register my details because I want to go and eat at this restaurant, or all of those things. You wouldn't normally be in the position where you'd give that level of data up, and suddenly we're encouraged as a nation, as a world, to do that because that's going to help us get back to normal. It's going to allow us to have the freedoms we had and all that sort of thing. And I think it just provides an extra platform and an extra reason for the guys that are behind this sort of thing in our previous world to just hop on it a little bit more, and that people's guards are a little bit more down, I think.
Yeah, I mean, especially because, just going back to the earlier point about it was definitely made for speed rather than safety. A lot of the messages that I've received that have been official have looked like the scammiest ones that I've ever seen.
Absolutely.
So, I don't know whether you've actually gone to go and get tested at any point, but it's just a bunch of texts that come from a random mobile number, and there's very little proof or addition. You just have to go to the website and kind of hope it's the same. So yeah, I guess that's definitely something. So what about you, Donna? What do you think?
I mean, I completely agree with the point that actually a lot of organisations are training people to be impacted by these phishing texts. And this is because that quite often when you order something and it comes through from DHL, they'll send you a text message to say delivery is coming. And the way that the scammers work is they basically spoof the telephone numbers, as I'm sure everybody knows, and it can even appear in the same list. My sister-in-law actually got caught on a text scam like that from her bank, and she couldn't work out how they'd been able to spoof it into the text that she normally gets from her bank. And I just said, you know what, just never click on a link in the text. And this is, again, I think it goes back to these organizations really need to be thinking about not just what's the easy thing to do, but what is the impact going to be on the people that are receiving this? Because not only are you training people to respond to stuff that could be phishing, but also some people will be so cautious they won't respond and they won't necessarily get the help that they need. So it sometimes I think reacting in haste and trying to get things out in a hurry, and it's very easy to have 20/20 hindsight, but it's for the next phase, this is going to be with us for a while. Think about how we can sort of try to breathe and maybe put a little bit more structure into what we're doing, so we're not making people more vulnerable to these types of situations.
Absolutely. So there we are. We've got the is. Now we're going to start talking about what will be. But before we move on to that, for those of you in the audience, the great thing about RANT is having this wealth of experience and knowledge at our disposal from all being part of the same cybersecurity community. So please do chuck in some messages and questions so I can read them out and everyone can benefit from some of the things that you've seen or you think. So please do write them in. So let's talk about the will be. Now, we've had a lot of false starts this year, last year. It was going to be for a week, it was going to be for 2 weeks, going to be for a month, it'll all be sorted by Christmas, and then here we are. And, there's talk of new variants, there's talk of new and exciting flare-ups and awful things happening down the horizon. No one really knows what the future will bring. But one thing that we do know is that a lot of companies appear to be taking those first very definite tentative steps towards bringing some form of normalcy back into the world, whether that be phased working, whether that be hot offices and things like that. How is this going to affect this question of cybercrime? Now we're returning to a point where people will be returning to the office. We will get a bit more of that informal security going on, and more closeness and that kind of thing. Is this going to make things better? Is it going to make it worse, or is it just going to make it different? Mila, I'm going to drag you in for this point, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think there's no good. I mean, there's no bad and worse in the world of cybersecurity. To us, it's every day is like another bigger and bolder day. I think there will be what I call, let's try to probably humanize it a little bit. One thing that we need to celebrate, because I don't want to do the doomsday thing all the time, is the fact that I think if we all look and reflect about our own security awareness, because at the end of the day, we're still wearing a normal hat. We're still a consumer, right? We're still a mom and dad, etc. I think the good news is the fact that the heightened level of awareness of a lot of people, from our more elderly to even the young kids, is super right now. So to me, that's really pleasurable, because we don't have to be in every day, we are in the headlines, right? So to me, that's one thing we need to celebrate. Where it will go is that there will be a continuation, I think, of supply chain attacks, because as I said, they have almost perfected it with some of this thing that we see. The other one, I think, is that there would be a little bit more ongoing attacks against government. The government, apart from the bank, is the top two all the time. But I think right now the government level would continue to be more refined in terms of the attacks that we will see. And then second is, how will they manipulate and use the data that they have accumulated since we've been going through pandemic? Remember, we've been signing as far as, as simple as signing up for a restaurant to signing up to register to our community. So we will probably gonna see this time, how will they manipulate that maliciously, as they have accumulated so much data in the past 1.5 years during the pandemic. To me, that's one. On the consumer level, on the regular levels, remember, some of these attacks are very topical. As we celebrate holidays, as we celebrate, big shopping days, they will not gonna go away. So we need to be able to be considerate and recognize those trends.
Lovely, thank you, Mila. So we've got a comment coming in from the audience from Brian. Organizations like PayPal and Amex still send legitimate emails containing active links to customers' accounts. They need to act more responsibly. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, any responses from our panel on that one?
I think that's it's a tricky one to tread. And I think over the many years, I've had various levels of conversation about what good email practice looks like. So on one hand, you've got user experience, and you want it to be as straightforward as possible, and that when you're asking your customer to do something, that it's really straightforward for them to go and do it, as opposed to, dear customer, your interest rate's going to change in the next month, therefore you need to go in and service your account. Here's a nice easy link to go and log in. But then the security part is, don't do that. Go and Google it, or whatever method. And it's just making sure that, I think it's the user experience and the education of the customers, the key thing, because it has got to be easy. Otherwise, they may fall into a trap of something else, where if you are using Google to look up your login page, then you could easily fall on a phishing site that's not been categorized yet, but it's been given the right priority on the search engine, etc. You're in a bit of a no-win scenario. The best way to do it is to, I don't know, I think it is about educating the customer more than it is radically changing how we interact. But yeah, I agree. I'm not a fan of the whole put the link in and do this. It's more I'm going to flag to you how we're going to interact with you. We're pushing more as an industry towards paperless interactions as well. And there's nothing better than getting something printed through the post that, is less likely to be tampered with than a text. Like Donna said, it can quite easily jump in the same communication method. So it does look like it's a genuine text. So nothing is sacred anymore. I think it's just about getting the right balance, which is, I guess, security 101, right?
So interestingly, what we've covered so far, we've talked about this great collection of vast amounts of data by healthcare providers, by companies, by delivery, everything, right? Are we going to see these great lakes of data being used and weaponized over the coming years? Are we going to see massive data breaches? Is this going to be a massive negative effect? Is this going to arm these threat actors with everything that they dreamed and more? I don't know whether any of you have got any any views on that. I guess, Donna, it's quite in your wheelhouse, but I'd like to hear what Mila has to say.
Me or Mila?
Let's start with you, Donna, and I'm going to move back to you, Mila.
So I think for me, one of the things I get concerned about is obviously that data could be put to bad use. And it also worries me as well in that people that might not normally be threat actors might be starting to move to these types of attacks. So if you think about the fact there's been a lot of passion in the world, both politically and against the virus, whether people are anti-vaxxers or pro-vaccine and that type of thing, and masks and right wing versus left wing. And I think because of the way the political situation has been, it's almost like the perfect storm. And you may find that because of this proliferation of data and the availability of tools on the dark web.
Oh, I think Donna's dropped out there. She's currently coming in by satellite. So when it rains, the satellite stops. And that's okay, because I've already teed Mila up. So Mila, I'm going to move back to you and we'll pick up Donna when she's back.
No problem.
So yes, if you're happy to carry on, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. So we've already mentioned earlier that this is the time that we will see probably how will they use it. They will use it in many different ways. I think number one is, again, misinformation, right? This is a lot of our political climate depends on sharing a lot of this. So they will definitely use that in misinformation campaigns that they will do either in politics, whether in highlighting a certain opinions and belief system. That's one. The second one is, let's not forget that also the digital fake news, fake voice, all of this fake engine we've seen it already. So highly likely that's where they would also somehow use it. And then the third area is really how they would cook up their next big attack by trying to weave who are their next critical target, right? Let's say, for instance, who are probably the more proponents of certain, let's say, the next vaccine or booster, etc. So definitely that's where we will see it a little bit more on a complex level. What we will continue to also see and how they will manipulate data is on the traditional corporate attacks, right? Because they know, just do a good Google search right now and you can see how big your own digital footprint right now. And you would say, I never signed up for this, or why am I in this mailing list, etc. So to me, those are pretty much the easier way until we see, again, a big data breach POC that they will probably be cooking up at the moment.
Interesting. Very interesting. Sorry, Donna, we lost you for a little second there, so I bounced across to Mila. If you can remember your train of thought, back to you, but if not, I'll move it on.
Where did you hear to? Because it sort of suddenly dropped out.
Near the start.
Always the way. So I'm not sure if Mila actually sort of said it already what I was trying to say, but it was more from the point of view of where the hacking tools were available and the people that might use them because of all the political angst that's going on at the moment. You might find that there are people that are harder to catch, that maybe don't have the motivation of trying to get money, but are there to try and cause destruction. And that's a bit that worries me. So we've matured from a warfare perspective, from the threat of nuclear arms and soldiers, etc., to the cyberspace. And what worries me is that those people who are so politically motivated start to take action in that way, because whereas others might be a little bit hesitant to do that because they're worried about the concerns of the blowback, some of these politically motivated people may not be as worried. So they might be interested in taking things about critical infrastructure, the hospitals, the political pages, and it's what the impact could be there, because a lot of critical infrastructure does have a lot of legacy tech debt, and they are going to be vulnerable for a while because it's not that easy to change. So if they don't invest in the right type of protection around there, and if, you know, and decide that actually it's worth putting the right level of security there, that could create huge problems, not just for the organisations, but from a social perspective as well.
Absolutely. I mean, it goes back to the first time that I got interested into information security, which was obviously Stuxnet, which was a big thing for where I was at university. It was the first one that saw that move from cyber to a real physical threat, where it then just, you know, caused a huge amount of damage and a very, you know, physical representation of just how far cyber had come. And now you've got lots of trials and people showing that you can flip over an oil rig if you want to, or cause huge devastation, or power grids and stuff like that. Obviously, we do touch on this by talking about cybercrime in a post-pandemic age. So now we are definitely into the post-pandemic portion, which takes us off quite nicely with the timing. Is this something that you're expecting to see more, Milo? Is this something that, as Donna has commented on, are we going to see more things like nation-state actors taking advantage of this? Or is it still going to be people mainly going after that quick win, that easy cash?
I would think we have to recognize also that there are this threat actors or criminals are highly specialized as well. We will see more in both, perhaps, because most of the threat actors who specialize in nation state, we still see them, right? So we have to recognize that they're highly specialized. It's just the heightened demand right now in the underground is obviously on how they would monetize it. So there's more skewed towards more of this money-making business. And sadly, ransomware companies are paying, governments are paying, so they're more lured to that. The nation state, I think, is something that would still be there, or attacks to infrastructure, attacks to intellectual property, attacks to academia in terms of research, they would still be there. I think what we have to note is the good news is government, like we've seen in both in UK and in US, they are really taking the stride right now and improving their defenses, acknowledging that this is a global problem, not just a skewed problem. So I think that's something we still need to kind of tap our back and say we're doing a good job. But I guess where it should move on is how we in the private companies, private organizations, continue to partner with the government. Because this is not the fight alone with the government or the consumer, right? So hopefully that's where we would see the unifying motion coming into play. Threat intelligence sharing, threat intel, discovery. I hope that's where we would focus on moving forward.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Milo. So, Catherine, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, if you're okay with that, because I think this is quite an interesting one. We've talked quite a lot about black hat actors and, you know, talking about people coming at it from financial or for other aims. It's obviously a changing world. Your work with the Northeast Ladies Hacking Society obviously has you on the other side of the fence, very much with the white hats. What kind of thing are the people that you're speaking to from that neck of the woods thinking about the post-pandemic age? Is this something that you've talked about at all? Have we got any fingers on the pulse there?
We've talked about it, yeah, and it is, I think, interesting as to how we will develop ourselves, develop the network, how we will conduct ourselves differently in that post-pandemic world. And I think we've seen a lot of positive aspects of it, really, in that what we would normally do, and particularly in the community side of things, Ladies Hacking Society, ISG Squared, OWASP, DEF CON, etc., all of these local chapters are now suddenly global chapters, which is amazing. We've been able to get a membership where we just wouldn't get in the corners of the types of people, the variety of backgrounds, the skills, the knowledge share that we've maybe had before, because we've kept it to a physical meetup. So we can quite happily pop along to, I don't know, a Vancouver chapter or something, because it fits our schedule and diary. Whereas you'd normally be sort of constrained to geographical location. So that coverage of perspective, whether it be cultural, regional, geographical, sector, it's pretty cool in that respect. And I think it's opened a lot of doors in a positive respect. But yeah, I think in terms of what we're seeing for that post-pandemic world, I don't think if we kind of boil it back down to exactly what has changed as a result, I think it falls back to everything that we've covered in terms of it's the same sort of vulnerabilities that are being exploited, whether it be technical, physical, personal. It's just that we've got a lot more opportunity to do something with it in a positive or negative way, because with any risk, there's always an opportunity, depending on which side of the fence you're on. So, yeah, I would say it's probably a positive aspect in terms of bolstering the cybersecurity network and just making the world a bit of a smaller place in that respect. Yeah.
And that's a really interesting one. I think the ability to create communities and actually call them communities online has been one of the great things that we have seen from this time. Whether it all started with trying to get people together for, you know, Zoom drinks and pub quizzes and anything to try and recreate social situations. But I think it has led to that. We've seen a huge level of interaction between people who never normally would, talking about a huge range of different topics and things. And, you know, those kind of things happen. As you say, I think a lot of the regional cybersecurity events especially tended to be that. They were regional, they were very close-knit, and you know, they tended to be small and they tended to be physical. Whereas now you do have that ability for different groups to go and speak. And I hope that that continues long into the future, because I think one of the beautiful things is you know, being able to share that kind of intelligence and information between groups is a real foundation of what makes cybersecurity community so strong. So hopefully that will continue. Great.
And I think just on that piece and kind of touching on the data collection aspect, we've got more opportunity to share that positive data collection in terms of exploiting it for the good, as opposed to sharing personal data, etc. Because that reach of the community, previously you might just go exactly to what you just said, you trusted kind of group. And that trust has been allowed to foster and get bigger and stronger over the past 12 months. And when you say, do you know what, I'm seeing this sort of behavior, are you guys seeing this? Then suddenly you've got a crowdsourced intelligence on what's happening or how you can tackle it. So I think it's a really good thing in that respect.
Lovely stuff. Great. So before we head into the final portion of the event, where I'm going to ask you all to make your final comments on the past, what's currently happening and what is going to happen. Now's the time where you get to pull out all of the really weird stuff. Now, we like a little bit of sci-fi as cybersecurity professionals, because we all like to pretend that, you know, there's lots of fun stuff going on. And it's a good way to think. Are there any wild predictions, views, or ideas that you think we will see in that post-pandemic age? I mean, we've got billionaires going to space, funded by Amazon workers having to urinate in bottles. We've got this strange dystopian world that seems to be coming out of it, where the richest people have become even richer. Is this going to affect cybersecurity in any way? And would you like to, live on camera, make that guess? Anything?
I think that's a really, really controversial question, and thanks for posing it, Tom.
No problem.
Maybe, I suppose, as an initial gut reaction to that is money just seems to be growing on trees for those guys. When you look at the stats of the growth of their wealth, it's insane when you look at the opposite end of the spectrum. And does that lead to anything positive? I'm not necessarily seeing a change to tax laws to help it benefit those who maybe could do with a bit of a leg up. And I think equity in society isn't changing. So does it mean that the rich are richer and have more power and more opportunity to exploit? That's very much glass half full, but very sci-fi as well. So
very good. And who knows? I mean, you know, if the rich keep getting richer, the poor keep getting poorer. What I'm hearing you say, Catherine, is there's going to be more cybercrime. That's
quite possibly, yeah. I think that's a fair summary. Keeps us in a job, which is pros and cons, right?
Yeah, indeed. Mila, Donna, anything you'd like to say, or should we move on to the finale?
I'm going to try and be. Oh, sorry, you go.
Sorry, Donna. I was just smirking because, you know, the only thing that is rich here is the rich guys, but I think that threat actors will want to get more richer, so I don't think they will go there. It's pretty incubated. There's no money in it for them, I guess. You know, maybe 10 years from now, you ask me the same question, I probably they will be there. I'll
keep that in mind, Milo. We'll bring you back. I'll have a fancy new, cyberpunk guy. It's going to be great. Donna.
So I'm actually going to go on the optimistic side. So I think one of the things that we've learned, like Catherine said, is the fact of how much easier it is to use technology. And I look at this very much. So I'm a chair of trustees at an academy up in the north of England. And this academy is quite remote, and they've had real problems sometimes with getting teachers on unusual topics like computing, etc. But the remote learning and the use of Teams has actually allowed them to bring in specialists from other parts of the country. So whilst it should never ever replace in-person teaching, it allows children that maybe aren't able to take advantage of things like that to learn skills that they might not normally get. So computing, foreign languages, etc., without the school having to pay to hire teachers in. And I think as well, a lot of people from the things like TikTok, Instagram, etc., people have got more of a voice and not just the youngsters. And I think it's actually brought a lot of people closer together across the world. So what I'm hopeful for is not only can social media, etc., and technology be used to sort of empower those who are angry, but also to empower those that want things to get better and want to work together, and to give them a wider voice so that we can drive a more positive change. And that probably really is sci-fi, but because it's the human race. But
I like that though, Donna. You're balancing out my fear, my negativity. Beautiful. Okay, well, let's get to the final part then. We've got 9 minutes left, which is just enough time to do some summaries. So if there is anything that you would like to add to this final chunk, then please do feel free. I'll work round in order, throw in as little or as much as you want. As a reminder, we're talking about the past, what is and what will be. Mila, as you started, I will hand it over to you first, if that's okay.
Oops, I was on mute. To me, I think we have to believe that we are an even more powerful engine. The good guys are even more powerful than the bad guys, right? So we continue to believe that we will win this game. All of this are hiccups, but I think we have to recognize that we're winning at some point. We are preventing and we're able to detect. I want to do also a big shout out to our, what I call the silent superheroes, which is the IT of the world. I'm just responding to what Guy is saying right now. We feel you, the IR, the SOC, whatever wonderful names they are in today. We need to give them a lot of love, resources, because at the end of the day, they're the ones who have to read thousands of reports and say, where am I going to focus on, right? If our job is at stake, their job is at stake most of the time. So I think we need to empower them. We give them the resources that they need. We have to make them part really of the bigger solution than just focusing on an incident. So to me, those are two big things I want to leave the group at.
My turn to not be able to find the mute button. Thank you, Mila. Catherine, Donna, who would like to take it next?
Well done. I'm still forming my thoughts after Mila's good summary.
Very good. Over to you, Donna.
So I think for me, situations like this are likely to happen again. It might not be a pandemic next time. So I think one of the things we've learned from incident response is that we get our plans in place and then we practice them. It's not a surprise that we were going to get a pandemic. One comes along roughly every 100 years. So this is probably just a little bit late. We should have been in a situation where we knew roughly what we were going to do before it happened. And I think one of the lessons I'd like to take away from this situation is, try and plan for these things a little bit more in future so that you don't end up training people to become vulnerable to phishing attacks. Try and get a more diverse group of people looking at how things are developed, maybe not just technologists, so that they realise how people are going to react to things, and sort of take away, nothing is ever a bad experience as long as you learn lessons from it and you don't repeat the mistakes. And that, for me, if we can take that away, it's going to allow us to grow and hopefully move forward more effectively. Again, I'm probably being a little bit too optimistic there, but you know, I'm a glass half full kind of gal.
Absolutely. Takes all types, so it's all good, Donna. You keep hoping and dreaming, and I'll keep being skeptical. Catherine.
Perfectly put. I think, Donna, on the that if we don't get it right, we've got a massive opportunity to learn and do things better. And I think reflection's a really important thing. And I think on the point that you made about can we get ourselves ready for the next version of pandemic or national crisis or whatever it might be. And I think one of the things that I often, it's almost a mantra to me, is the one constant thing in life is change. So let's make sure we're as ready and as agile to deal with whatever that comes in front of us. And sometimes, and when I think about this from a like cyber incident response perspective, it is about actually just having some of those foundational checkpoints, which are going to give you the framework for anything that comes in front of you. And as long as you can keep a hold of that and keep your head in amongst all of these things, because change, not many people love it, but it's the one constant. So let's get comfy with it and let's be able to react in the way that we need to each time that you're presented with that random surprise.
There we go. As Bob Dylan once said, times they are a-changing, and that is what we are going to stick to. And the times are changing. We will keep rolling with them, and I have absolute faith in the fact that the cybersecurity community will continue to adapt, develop best practice, and rise to the challenge at all corners. A huge thank you to you, our wonderful panelists, for creating this wonderful chat that we've had over the previous hour. I've had the wonderful backdrop of pouring rain outside, which has definitely created that cyberpunk aesthetic that I've been trying to talk about. But hopefully everyone at home has enjoyed it as much as we have. Tonight wouldn't have been possible without Trend Micro, our sponsor for this evening. So thank you so much, Myla, as the personification of said company, for helping support this event and our community. Likewise, thank you, Acumen, for sending across some beers for all of our wonderful attendees. And last but not least, thank you, attendees, for coming to join us today. This is, I believe, our last virtual RANT radio until that I have booked in, actually. We will be returning on the 29th of September in person in London. I know it's a very exciting point. More details to come. We've got lots of plans there, so I'll be letting everyone know exactly what's going on. But don't worry, we are working on a hybrid solution to ensure that we can keep providing this kind of content for those who can't quite make it down to London, as we know that some of you are geographically challenged for the London events. Thank you, everyone. I hope you have a great evening, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks all. Thank you.